Hi, everyone. Welcome to our third session of the day. I'm Mark Iskowitz, editor-at-large for MM+M, and I'll be your moderator for the next 35 minutes or so as we discuss the state of diversity in agencies today. It's sponsored by W2O. I'm joined by an amazing panel who are going to discuss and debate that topic and take your questions as well. I'll introduce them in a moment. First, let me just say a few words of introduction. Medical marketing agencies have talked for decades about the importance of diversity in their ranks, but to what extent has the talk translated into action? At the leadership level of small and large agencies alike, representation of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, still lags behind the general U.S. population at large. And by having the same people who had maintained inequitable systems continuing to lead marketing teams, that creates the potential to maintain the status quo. And everything from participation in clinical trials to launching pharma brands. As you can see, the stakes for getting this right are quite high. People want to know, what are the actions medical marketing firms can and should take to achieve genuine gender diversity and racial diversity across their ranks? In today's session, you'll hear directly from three seasoned agency-based marketers about the state of DE&I in the workplace, their real-life experiences in creating healthcare campaigns, why adding equity to the D&I equation is so important, and what we need to do to ensure more diverse, inclusive, and equitable workplaces moving forward. I'll now briefly introduce our panelists, and they hail from a variety of different backgrounds. First up, we have Walter T. Geer III. He's Executive Creative Director, Experience Design for VML-Y&R. Walt's been focused on experience design throughout his career. He's very active in promoting workplaces to be more inclusive. And he also started diversecreatives.com with Ron Lewis to help address the shortage of diverse talent in the agency world. Hey, Walt.
Hey, man. How you making out?
Great. Thanks for joining us. Also joining us is Marcia Windross, Head of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at W2O. Prior to W2O, for 12 years, Marcia was the Senior Director of D&I at Interpublic Group, providing strategic direction and subject matter expertise for the holding company's D&I initiatives. And Marcia has a DE&I job, which includes equity, which is somewhat rare in this industry. So we're looking forward to hearing from her on that. Hey, Marcia, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Mark. Happy to be here.
Great. And last but certainly not least, Taylor Mahmoud is Associate Managing Director, Havas Health Plus. Prior to Havas, she was EVP Marketing Growth at Razorfish Health, and Taylor has worked for Gray as well. All told, I think she has over 15 years in healthcare communications. Welcome, Taylor.
Thanks, Mark. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And that was just a snapshot. All three of our panelists are outspoken about the need for creating a diverse and inclusive culture for Black and Brown creatives in advertising. And you can read their full bios here on the conference portal. One more point before we begin the discussion. We'll leave several minutes for questions. So please, I encourage you all to use the Q&A function on your webcast dashboard to submit questions for our panel, and I'll do our best to queue them up for them. Okay, on to the discussion. First, I'd like to, talk about diversity and your observations just in general. Agencies are having a difficult time increasing diversity. I think we can all agree that that problem exists. And I'd love to hear you all talk about your experience in the four walls of whatever agencies you've worked in, whether it be healthcare or non-healthcare. Please share your observations on either the state of diversity, equity, inclusion, and, what are the underlying reasons for the slow progress here. And Marcia, how about we start with you on this one?
So, as you heard, I was at IPG for over 12 years. And I must say that we did make a lot of progress in advancing our DEI agenda at IPG because we had leaders that were committed and they tied DEI goals to compensation. And as you know, money talks. There was accountability, but we recognized that there was still a lot more work to be done. So I've only been at W2O for 2 months, but the reason why I took the role at W2O is because I saw that they were really serious about being a catalyst for change in the diversity, equity, and inclusion realm. They were not just talking, they are walking the talk and putting the resources and commitment to affect change. They actually acknowledge that they were failing or falling short and are taking the necessary actions to be more inclusive. And I think that's important. And, after the horrific murder of George Floyd, I started getting a lot of calls from different companies. But most of those companies wanted a chief diversity officer or a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion as an individual contributor with not a lot of support. So what I love about W2 and why I took the role is that I have a team. In fact, they had already started sourcing my team before I got there. Not only do I have a team, but I am reporting into our president, Jen Gottlieb, and I have very frequent check-ins with our CEO, Jim Wise. And then at W2O, there are two sides to DEI. My team focuses on our employees, but my partner, Abby's team, she leads the DEI client engagement practice. So they had already started the DEI journey and are putting all the actions and the resources and the commitment behind it to ensure that they're successful in reaching their goals. And what I like about W2O is that they've been transparent. They have set some goals and they're going to be reporting out their metrics. And they too are also going to be holding leaders accountable for their DEI outcomes. So they recognize that they have a lot of work to be done, and they're willing to put actions and resources behind it. So in terms of my observation on the state of DEI in the industry, I feel that, there have been a lot going on between the various agencies and different activities and resources, but we're not really seeing that the needle being moved a lot. And it just could be that we're not being intentional in creating the right environment to attract and retain diverse talent. I mean, when you look at representation in our industry, it's way below the national average. The BIPOC community is 41% nationally, but in our industry, it's 34%. And then when you break it out, when you look at gender, women is at 47% nationally, 51% in our industry. Yet when we look at the leadership team, they're mostly of the majority male. So over 80% of leaders are white men. When we look at Blacks, nationally we are at 13%, but 8% for the industry. For Hispanics and the Latinx community, we're at 18% nationally versus 13% in the industry. Asians are a little bit better. I mean, they are 7% nationally and 6% in the industry. So we need to do a lot of work to recruit more diverse talent, and not just at the entry level. We have a lot of pipeline programs, but then when they get to the mid-level, there's this broken rung for Hispanics and for Blacks. And furthermore, if we're not doing the work to create the type of environment that are inclusive, where our colleagues can thrive, feel like they belong, be innovative and creative, then we're not going to attract any of the diverse talent that are out there. So, all the research shows that diverse leaders, diverse workforce positively and substantially impact the bottom line. So I'm not sure why progress is so slow. I don't know if it's because they don't believe the research, from McKinsey, Deloitte, Mercer, or it could be that they don't know. But, it could also be that there's a certain amount of fear. Folks do not want to give up their spots at the top, and that's the same fear that caused the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. So we really need to get our industry moving more towards inclusion, equity, and hiring a diverse workforce.
It was an excellent setup, Marcy, and I like the way you put it as the broken rung, for Hispanics and Blacks communities within agencies. Taylor, I wanted to just get your thoughts on this too. What do you think is happening right now from your point of view?
I think, many agencies are arriving at this at different starting points. So I don't want to paint a broad brush, so to speak, but there's definitely slow progress all around. And when I think about this, two things come to mind. I think lack of prioritization and dedication of resources and commitment to follow through. So just to address, some of the hypotheses raised, I don't know if it's about not believing the statistics or, I think data is data, right? But it's making a commitment and prioritizing diversity, as a business, a challenge. So agencies are experts at solving big business challenges. That's what we do every day. And we should be looking at this as a business challenge and be approaching it with the same level of rigor. And that starts with, listening, identifying the problem, assigning and dedicating resources. And I would like to add, assigning a resource that's not fully ingrained in the system, because sometimes when you're in the system, you're blind to the challenges and the broken parts of the system that would impact someone else. And then dedicating the resources, be it time, money, budget, to make sure that you put your money where your mouth is, and there's some measurable actions that are followed through. So I think it's focus, it's commitment, and it's follow through.
Yeah, those are great prescription there. Walt, why do you think this is happening? Why we haven't made more progress in the agency world?
Oh, Mark.
Where do we start?
Oh boy. Look, you guys know me, right? So you're gonna hear a couple F-bombs, you're gonna hear a couple curse words. I apologize well in advance. This is who I am. It's fucking shit, right? Let's be honest. And I don't think that anyone is gonna get up here on the stage and say my agency is fucking up and they're doing a horrible job. I've been fortunate. I'm not the agency guy by any means. I've been now at two agencies over the past 3 years, TBWA and now BML-YNR. I've been fortunate to work within places where I'd had senior leadership who get and understand the importance of diversity, right? It's why I was put in my position at both of these agencies. Yet, there are a lot of agencies and companies, for that matter, right, that are really good at talking the talk and not good at walking the walk. And that's a simple fact, right? And while I can go on a tantrum about this, and I'm not going to go too far out on a ledge here, but and I say this all the time, how many people, how many companies, how many agencies, how many holding agencies came out and said that they were going to donate millions of dollars this past summer? We're going to donate $10 million and we're going to help build Black businesses and we're going to help all these Black employees. And I, literally, I was on a call with Gary Vee earlier this summer, and Gary Vee said that by January 1st, I'm going to hire 2 Black C-suites, and it's going to be on my shoulders, and it's going to, I hold the brunt of, that responsibility, and I very kindly called him out by reposting that clip a week ago. He responded on Twitter, and now we're gonna have a live next week, Monday, where we're gonna talk about that, right? And it's holding him accountable. And so when we talk about how we actually move the needle and why people are slow because they're not being called out. People are slow because it's not affecting their bottom line. People are slow because it's not affecting their pockets and what they're taking home. And if you start to impact their revenue and you start to impact their salary, that's when change happens, right? So I say it all the time. You want impact? This is how we make changes, like, rapidly. 2 things. Number 1, tell P&G to come out. If P&G came out and said one thing, we want all of our agencies to be completely diverse, so it shows through the work that we do, and we want the leadership to be diverse, and that is it. Largest spender in all of advertising in the world. They say that, every agency in 2 seconds will actually go and make that change, and then every other company will then fall in line, right? That's it. Second thing is that executive leadership needs to be held accountable. When I talk about accountability, you impact the salary they're taking home. So, majority C-suites are getting anywhere from 50 to 100% bonuses, right? That's a lot of money we're talking about, right? So let's just say that a C-suite is at like 500 grand. We're talking about $250,000 to $500,000 additional that they're bringing home every February, March, this time of year, right? So what I say is, make diversity in those numbers a part of their bonus in compensation, right? So you'd say like 20% of your bonus is going to be based on how diverse your organization and your team is, right? Now, I know a lot of agencies are saying, yes, we do that, but when it's like 1 or 2%, it doesn't fucking matter, because 1 or 2% of $250,000 or $500,000 really isn't that much money.
Mm-hmm. Right. I didn't get that part, but at least I got the bulk of it, which might be, they're incentivized on the success of a launch or what have you. So, yeah, I mean, I think I've heard that as a familiar refrain within the pharma industry for years in terms of all sorts of catalysts for change, in terms of the pain of not changing is still not as great as the pain of changing, and so, look, it took a pandemic, for them to, change the way they market. And that was just because they couldn't access, customers in the same way as they needed to. And so they changed really quick.
At one point, Marcia spoke to something along the lines of fear, and there can be a mindset of scarcity, right? And so if there's a thought that there's only a certain amount of jobs, and if I have to fill those with diverse employees, diverse in all stretch of the imagination, then that may take away from me or others. And those are the same folks that we're talking about tying incentives to. It's not a mindset of scarcity. It's really a mindset of abundance, because diversity is going to directly impact the pockets of, the leadership in a positive way, because we know that it yields business outcomes. So it's kind of a reverse way of thinking, because it's not a scarcity model. Once the measures are met in terms of recruitment, retention, which is a really important point. There's one element about recruiting someone into the organization. There's another aspect to say, have you kept them longer than a year? Are they moving up the organization? Are they supported? That needs to come into play.
I'm sorry, but the bigger issue when we start to address now, like health agencies in the importance of diversity there, we're talking about individuals who are working with brands to save people's lives. Like oftentimes we talk about advertising, we'll all joke around and say, hey, well, don't worry, don't kill yourself. We're not saving lives. We are saving lives. When you're working on treatment for cancer and sickle cell, like all this stuff that let's be honest, right? The impact on Black people is significantly higher. We've seen the disparities over the past year now, right? So this is why that is so important, because, even a lot of these, and I know we're going to get into this later, but like even a lot of these pharma companies, when they're having drugs or medications that's created specifically for people of color or Black people, they don't even thoroughly know or understand the audience that they're making these drugs for, right? And so it's our responsibility to get in there and educate and help craft the story and help message the story correctly. And God forbid when you go down the whole route of then like clinical trials, all the errors there. But I'm sure we'll get to that at some point. I don't want to ramble here.
Yes, no, not at all. And that was a perfect segue actually to my next question, which is going to be about the work and your experiences producing it. I'm sure you guys have been in situations where you had difficulty leading a diverse campaign for any of your brands. Can you talk about that a little bit? And or alternatively, what is the impact of a lack of diversity on the work itself, and why that's especially important in healthcare? Walt, why don't we stay with you on that one?
Yes. I can say I've had some difficulties, right? And I'm not going to call out any specific brands, but let me be honest in saying, like, I think a lot of brands have difficulty, right? Because a lot of brands need to feel educated. And let me go back a little further as an example. I recall working for a particular brand who majority of the folks that they actually were targeting were Black, right? Yet they did not understand why you shouldn't be targeting the very slim amount of people that were not Black, because they thought that, well, because we reached this entire audience already, why do we have to continue going after them, right? It took having to actually go in there with senior leadership and actually explain the history of Black people and explain the history of this particular thing or this disease or this issue for them to say, holy shit, you're absolutely right. And we didn't actually think about it that way. And that changed the entire trajectory of the campaign. And the campaign was fucking incredible. They loved it. We loved it. It was incredible work. But sometimes that's what it takes. right? Because a lot of times when you sit back and you see all these problematic stuff through these different campaigns, let's even go outside of health. You start talking about like things like Pepsi and Kylie Jenner or H&M in the monkey on the kid's shirt. The go-to question everyone asks is, well, how did that happen? Well, it happened because there are 2 Black chief creative officers in the major holding agencies. There are 6 Black ECDs on one of them, and then there's 5 Black GCDs, now 6, due to Ron Lewis recently, Black GCDs. So they're at the table. These are those roles like ECDs and CCOs are the decision makers and the final say on this creative before it goes out the door, right? And then let's talk about strategists. Like I don't see many of those that look like me. So when you're talking about people who are strategizing and doing the work and then presenting to the client and kicking out the door, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm. But just to build on that, I think the impact within healthcare cannot be understated. It's life or death. And I mean, I'm not being dramatic when I say that. Like patients are not homogenous, neither are HCPs. The patient population is just becoming more and more diverse. And when creative and communications miss the mark in healthcare communications, it's the difference between minorities not being included or not wanting to participate in clinical trials for products that will directly impact their lives. It's a matter of someone walking into the ER and their pain being underestimated. It's a matter of a physician speaking to a patient in a very condescending or demeaning way, and that turns the person off from going to the doctor, or disproportionate distribution of vaccines, right? So we're talking about impacting people's lives, and that can't be understated. So when we're the ones as advertisers shaping culture, shaping behaviors, shaping communications in this realm, there needs to be diverse perspectives sitting at the table and us not perpetuating bad behaviors, stereotypes, or anything. We're the ones, I think it was mentioned earlier, providing information, education, resources to help, solve these challenges and hopefully help people from a health perspective. So we can't be contributing to the problem.
The other side to that is, so we're at the table, but we don't have a voice, right? So when we look at what happened to some of the brands like Pepsi and H&M, you may have had someone of color or a Black person there, but they didn't feel that the climate was not inclusive, or they didn't have a speak up culture where they felt that they could say, hey, I don't think that's a good idea. So it's also being at the table, right? But also being able to speak up and, let your voice be heard, and feeling that there's psychological safety, that you can speak and you will be heard.
But that goes back to the numbers, right? Having one person at the table, that's a lot of pressure on that one person. And we all know that one person may not be the person that person may not voice the same concerns that you or I would. So that's why, diversity, it needs to expand beyond, okay, we've reserved this one seat, this one brown seat here, and we want to make sure that person stops all tragedies, and that's too much. Everybody has to be thinking that way. It's not a problem of one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can't have just some simple majority of one or a minority of one, and expect the buck to stop with that one person. If I might just quote Bennett D. Bennett, a varialist, he said on this topic, making a more representative workforce and staff is just as important as making work that resonates with consumers. And as you all put it so eloquently, that is very much most importantly felt in healthcare. The two are not mutually exclusive. That representative workforce and the work that resonates with target audiences. I just want to get into a quick question for Marcia, and then we'll shift gears again, maybe take some audience questions. Marcia, just on the importance of equity, you have a title of DE&I, which is still somewhat of a rarity in healthcare. Why is that important to add that equity piece to the D&I equation?
Well, I think that equity is the secret sauce, right? So you can have diverse employees, you can have inclusion, but if you're not recognizing that each colleague has different circumstances, and then providing access, resources, and opportunities so that, you have equal outcomes, then there's no equity and you will not get the type of inclusive environment and the type of outcome that's needed for our employees to thrive.
Let's shift gears and talk about from the equity piece to on that, use that as a jumping off point to moving forward, to ensure more diverse, inclusive, and equitable work environments. In the summer of 2020, a large number of brands and corporations, of course, rushed to show the world that they were part of the country's reckoning with systemic racism. Many agencies did as well. But how can agencies build on those well-intentioned commitments and go from promise to reality? And is that happening consistently enough? Marcia, how about we kind of stay with you on this? Just kind of give us your forward-looking thoughts.
My forward-looking thoughts. So let me step back a bit and tell you that a lot of those companies and agencies made all these public commitments, and they were ready to make all types of donation, which is good, but they still needed to take care of their employees internally. So I think it's really, really important to hear from your employees. So whether you conduct assessments, listening tours, or some type of audit to really hear how they're feeling in their environments. And then based on that, you determine what your priorities are and the areas, where the blind spots are and the steps that you need to take. And I also believe that, as Walter said, it's around accountability, holding leaders accountable. It's also about transparency and, taking the actions and the steps needed to build that environment so that when you recruit diverse talent at the entry level, that you provide resources that they can move up into the organization so that they can thrive. And it's about being intentional, making sure that you're not just going to the same places to recruit. You're not taking all your interns or referrals from your clients and therefore they're all of the majority. It's taking intentional steps and changing some of what you're doing. If you keep doing the same thing and you're not getting a different outcome, then it's madness. So you really need to look at what companies are doing who you think are doing better than you are. So it's best practices. And then, acknowledging that you really need to do the work and put the resources and the commitment behind it.
Would you guys be okay if we took some audience questions right now? Just with, we only have a few minutes left.
I'm just mad we can't go like another 30, 40 minutes.
Right.
I know, right? Each of these is a whole topic unto itself. I thought some really good questions are coming in, so thank you for the audience for these. But love to hear, here's a question. I would love to hear from the panel about how they work with clients who don't understand all the baggage around clinical trials and BIPOC in the U.S. So, can you kind of refer to that? How you deal with this sort of sensitive, touchy topic of clients who might not appreciate, like the rest of us do, about the need for this?
This is kind of boils back to what I was saying earlier, right? A lot of it is around education. Look, it is our jobs as creatives and strategists and accountants and whatnot that are working, managing these relationships with the clients. It is our responsibility to make sure or ensure that they're putting the best quality work out into the marketplace, right? So as a representative of their voice that goes out to the public, it is our job to make sure, as I said earlier, that we are thoroughly educating. And sometimes it is difficult, right? And it's, you play this thin line of, well, I'd like to make sure that we're doing this, but sometimes the client is actually then pushing back and what's the furthest you can push, right? I like to show by proof, show by examples, or leading by examples, excuse me. So you could show other work that other people are doing. You could show how effective that is as well. We have in many times also included our chief diversity officer, right? And I don't think the chief diversity officers are coming in to pitch enough, right? We've had CDOs who come in and then help craft the story and tell the history and all this stuff. I think it really boils down to the research, right? And being able to come to the table with like sustainable evidence that, yes, this is why you need to do this thing. Sometimes it's also going out and actually doing some of the work and doing testing, right? Like you can provide opportunities to do A/B testing. Let's hit a small market. Let's actually send this messaging and this messaging, or this type of creative and that type of creative, and see what resonates and see what bubbles up. There's also like usability testing, right? And you can go and ask folks directly that type of stuff before going directly in the market.
Sure, sure. I'm going to try to combine a couple questions here. How can employees who don't make hiring decisions impact their company's recruiting and hiring of diverse talent? And what are some of the ways that your organizations work to keep the burden of education and fostering inclusive culture off of the URM employees and equally on the majority members, not just leadership? In other words, not just leadership, but like the rank and file employees, what can they all do to foster a more inclusive relationship and to foster a more diverse pipeline of new hires?
Well, I could start. I think first of all is participating in your organization's employee resource groups or business resource groups and taking on leadership roles and ensuring that those BRGs are actually, impacting the employees by the type of programming that you out there. So, for example, look at how to ensure that you're advancing each other's careers, make sure that there's mentoring involved. Sponsorship is really key as well, and a lot of education around advancing your careers. I think that would be a good start for an employee, and definitely if you're of the BIPOC community, make sure that you are referring talent to HR when they're looking to recruit. I would say to you, go on to the website and see what opportunities are available and look in your network to see who you can refer to your company.
Just
and
one other.
URM, by the way, is the underrepresented minority. Sorry, go ahead.
Can I just build on that? I think I want to use the word line manager, but just for lack of a better term, anyone who's in a line manager position is just as important as senior leadership in terms of how they display and show, inclusive leadership every day is really important. Most people have interaction with their team, right? And their team shapes their experience. So everyone has a role in practicing good behaviors as well, in terms of being inclusive, and then holding others and around them accountable, their coworkers, for what is happening. I do think that I think that it does have to start with leadership, not just from a buy-in perspective, but like advocating, being, engaged, support. And so it really does start with leadership, being the champion in the face for belonging. And then it trickles down into the culture. But I mean, everybody plays a role, but it certainly is not a responsibility of underrepresented communities to solve the challenges that exist within this agency. It's not a Black problem or a gay problem. It's everybody's challenge to make sure that the environment is inclusive.
There is this fear that we cannot use our voice, right? So people who ask that question, like, well, what can we do when we're not hiring managers, we're not bringing in the talent? How do we make an impact to make an effect on the company and their diversity? Use your voice, right? We can go out and have conversations. And when I talk about holding people accountable, I'm not saying, hey, fuck this company, they're not doing the right thing, they need to hire more Black people or brown people, whatever. No, it's posing the question, right, in really kind of meaningful ways, right? It's utilizing platforms like LinkedIn, where tons of C-suite see that, right? It's when we launched Black Health Now at TBWA, that, no one knew it would take off the way it did, right? But it resonated so much that it changed the entire culture of the agency, right? So when we actually go out and publicly say these things, and we're going out and walking, in lockstep together with these conversations, this is how we make the greatest impact. Because when you're doing that from internally and you're raising your voice and other people see that, then your agency is going to look back and say, oh shit, you know what? This seems to be bubbling up. Yes, maybe we need to be doing some more work. And again, it's not being like, an asshole, right across social media, but it's essentially like asking the questions, just like I did, like I said, with Gary Vee. I wasn't a dick about it. I simply said, hey, I'd love to help you if you haven't filled these roles. Here's a video clip where you actually said you were going to do this. What happened? Do you need help filling that role? Right? So we can do these things.
And here's 10 candidates that I know of off the top of my head who could fill that role, right?
Exactly.
We know candidates.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, yeah. I know, Taylor, you wanted to talk a little bit about tangible things, tangible actions. Is there anything else you want to say on that score, or do you think we've covered that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, just one thing that is kind of simple. If I were as a leader of the organization, I would suggest someone to examine their full employee journey. There's a lot of emphasis placed on recruitment, but you really have to think about everything from recruitment to interviewing and what you're looking for, the onboarding process, particularly in healthcare. There's this very short runway for knowing everything on through like mentorship programs. And I can't emphasize enough the value of the learnings and exit interviews. There's so many people of color who have left the advertising industry within healthcare. I would love to just sit and read those exit interviews and see what the commonalities are with their challenges and what actions could be placed against those. The data, you already have the data. It's a matter of just prioritizing tangible actions against that data.
That's all the time that we have, unfortunately. And for those who asked questions, I apologize we didn't get to them. I'm sure our esteemed panel would be happy to talk offline. Anybody can get in touch with us or them directly if they'd like. I want to thank our panel, Taylor, Marcia, and Walt. I feel like we really advanced the dialogue here and gave some tangible actions. You guys were all amazing. Thank you so much. I also want to thank W2O for their sponsorship. You're tuned into the MM+M Racial Equity Summit. The next session is coming up at 2:05. Thank you, everybody, for listening and for your great questions. We'll see you another time. Take care.
Have a good one. Thanks for having me. Us.
Thank you.
Take care.